Good afternoon, Rowan. It's the 23rd of December 2016 and it's about 1 o'clock. And obviously this is my usual Friday video to reassure you I won't be seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. Anyway, I'm making this video a bit early today because it's coming up to Christmas and I've got things I want to be getting on with, like putting my Christmas tree up. And I'd rather have a nice time doing that later and dreaming about my beloved and so on. So I'm making this video a bit early today. So anyway, I'm still talking about this talk that you gave, supposedly about sustainable prosperity, on the 28th of November 2016, which was uploaded onto YouTube just a week ago, the first half of it anyway. So I'm now talking about something in the question and answer session where somebody asks you about the attitude of the popular press towards the environmentalist cause. I suppose that's the best way to summarise it. So here's what you say. I don't hold out very much hope in that respect because a disproportionate amount of the popular press is, let's say, disproportionately tolerant of a laissez-faire or head-in-the-sand approach to these matters. So what you mean is that the popular press isn't sufficiently alarmist for you. And in fact, there's been lots of clampdowns on the press. I don't know about recently, but certainly when this global warming scare first skyrocketed, shall we say, around 2007, there was a lot of clampdown on the press and the media if they tried to report any alternative opinion. So I'd say that the opposite is true, actually, that people are inhibited from reporting alternative opinions to this global warming hoax. So there has been some articles in the press showing, for example, I've used this in a video before, the fact that the ice cap at the North Pole is actually expanding, not only in the area that it covers, but in its density as well. And this was a photograph, it showed a photograph of this, which I believe was taken in 2014. And according to Al Gore and his ridiculous film, which had so many errors in it, it wasn't even allowed to be shown in British schools. According to that, there was supposed to be no summer ice cap at the North Pole by 2013, but actually the ice is expanding and thickening, and global temperatures have been cooling since about 1998. But you wouldn't think so to listen to crap merchants like you, who are simply promoting this environmentalist agenda for the purposes of one world government and world domination by the elite and depopulation. And there's some information about this political agenda later in this video. So you then say, that's where it's very important to keep these ideas, these challenges alive through social media, through those other channels we have, and you raise your voice an octave there to try and sound authoritative. But no, I'm not holding my breath for a positive response from that quarter, I have to say. It's an odd thing that is statistically so much a minority report in terms of political, scientific, geopolitical perspective is given, as I say, such a free pass in a lot of the media, because there's this mysterious assumption that climate change is a left wing, which suggests to me that the laws of nature are left wing. So you're saying that climate change is actually happening, and some people at least perceive this as being part of the left wing agenda, which indeed it is. And I'm talking about the really extreme left now, who want a totalitarian state and want to be pushing everyone around and telling them what to do and how to live and what resources they're allowed to use and all this kind of thing. Lunatics like you, I'm talking about, who are not wanting to improve the conditions of human living or human life in any way whatsoever. You just get off on being in control of people, and you think you're superior to other people, and you've got some kind of inherent right to be pushing other people around and telling them what to do because you think that you're superior. And there's ample evidence that you personally think that you're superior, which I've demonstrated in other videos. So climate change is a left-wing issue, and there's some information about that later in the video as well. And I would also say that you're giving this talk the day after I uploaded a video about a talk that you gave at I think it was a Cambridge college, which was sometime in the middle of October, and the theme of the talk was, can capitalism ever be ethical, or something like that. And you described capitalism as we've invented a potentially lethal monster, and you compared it to nuclear weapons as well. You said that it's like nuclear weapons, it can't be uninvented. And so I made this video in which I said that actually capitalism isn't an ideology, it's just free trade between people, and it developed naturally out of people's wishes and necessity to trade with each other. And then I compared it to communism, which is an ideology, which I said isn't a potentially lethal monster, it's an actually lethal monster, and nearly 100 million people in the 20th century were murdered in communist regimes. This is the citizens of the countries, not foreign enemies or anything like that. So I'll mention that again later on because you say something in relation to this. And you also quoted Karl Marx in this video with some ridiculous crap about how capitalism alienates the producer from the product or something like that, which is just like postmodernism. It doesn't mean anything at all, and it's the same as the crap that you come out with. So I commented on all this in the video I uploaded the day before, and I also showed a clip saying that Karl Marx had been recruited by a secret society, and that there was the conspiracy to bring in a totalitarian one world government, a communist government through the United Nations, and the purpose of communism is not to empower the proletariat at all, or to make there be a more equal distribution of wealth among everybody. The communist system doesn't work anyway, but it was never intended to work in this way. The purpose is to steal land and property away from private ownership and to put it all under the control of the global elite with a view to eliminating the majority of people on the earth. And I also showed a photo of Karl Marx demonstrating that he was a Freemason. And I also said in this video that I uploaded the day before this lecture that I'm talking about now, that you were lambasting Donald Trump in the national press in Britain for racist remarks he hasn't even made. And then I showed some evidence of racist remarks that Karl Marx had made, but you don't think to comment on anything like that because it's this Marxist agenda that you want to be promoting. So Karl Marx can do no wrong and Donald Trump can do no right. That's how your worldview is, Rowan, which I've also demonstrated many times, that anyone who is serving you and promoting the agenda that you want to promote can do no wrong. And anyone who resists that, even unintentionally or unknowingly, can never do any right in your eyes, because the whole purpose of other people is to say what you want, do what you want, give you what you want, and worship and adore you, because you do quite literally think that you are God, which I've also mentioned in previous videos and shown some evidence of things that you've said that lead me to this conclusion. So this was all in the video the day before, and so now you're bristling about this left-wing agenda and pretending that environmentalism isn't part of this left-wing agenda. Well, there's some information later in this video that shows that it is part of this extreme left-wing agenda to bring in a totalitarian one-world government, and basically just to steal land and property from everybody. Um, not just wealthy people, although stealing from anybody isn't the right thing to do, but not just from wealthy people, but from everybody, so that nobody can have everything and the government can be in control of everything. And then, of course, the government is controlled by these elites. So nobody is saying that the laws of nature are left wing. What I'm saying is that you're conflating the argument of protecting the environment with global taxation, which I've also showed you talking about that before, and I've put a clip about that later in the video, that the only outcome you want is a one world government and global taxation and the government controlling everything. You're not interested in preserving the environment at all. And I'm showing now on the screen, here's a photo, a screenshot of the annual report of the Church Commissioners of the Church of England for the year ending 31st of December 2012, which was when you left office as Archbishop of Canterbury, and you were appointed as Archbishop of Canterbury in 2002. So you were Archbishop of Canterbury for 10 years, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is one of the Church Commissioners, and the Church Commissioners look after all the investments of the Church of England. They do some other things as well, but the main thing that they do is they look after the investments and the financial matters of the Church of England. And I've made a whole video about this previously, where you were moralising at Cambridge University to divest from fossil fuel companies. And as you can see on the screenshot here, one of the biggest investments of the Church of England in the year ending 31st of December 2012, when you left office as Archbishop of Canterbury, was Royal Dutch Shell, and another one was BP. And the Church of England also had investments in other oil companies. Now, I don't particularly care about this in an environmental sense in relation to global warming anyway, because I know the whole thing's a hoax. But there are you, moralising at everybody and trying to bring in a one world government. I've made a whole video about these investments in the Church of England before, when you didn't do a single thing to have the Church of England divest from fossil fuel companies. And there was a lot of criticism about this from Christian bodies who were interested in restricting global warming and addressing this issue, and there was a lot of criticism around 2009. It was in all the British press of the environmental damage caused by oil companies in which the Church of England had investments, and particularly in oil companies that were operating in Nigeria, and the environmental damage that was being caused in Nigeria by these oil companies. Royal Dutch Shell, which runs oil companies in Nigeria. So you were fully aware of this, and you didn't do a single thing about it. And I've made a whole video about this. I've made several videos about your environmentalist outpourings and the way that you're just promoting a political agenda. You don't care at all about the environment. I remember another video I made when you were giving a lecture in York, the EBO lecture. I can't remember exactly the year now, just off the top of my head. But you were saying, people should go along with this agenda and address global warming. It's no good saying, well, let's ask some questions about it or anything like that. It's no good saying that. Tell that to people in Bangladesh and tell it to people in the Pacific Islands or something like that. And I made a video about this saying actually sea level has fallen around Bangladesh, and Bangladesh now has a lot more square miles, a huge amount more. I can't even remember how much more, but it's something like 100,000 or something like that extra square miles because sea levels actually fallen around Bangladesh. And also, there's absolutely no evidence that there's a general shrinkage of the size of Pacific Islands, and I've quoted scientific studies and shown screenshots of them saying that actually the Pacific Islands that have been studied, something like 85% of them haven't shrunk, and also there's a lot more to the size of an island than sea level as well. There are other factors that influence it, such as coral growth, for example. So I've made a whole video about that, and the simple fact that you're not remotely interested in the environment because you don't concern yourself with the facts, you don't concern yourself about any of these things, and you were on the Church Commissioners of the Church of England, and you care so much about global warming, you obsess about it all the time, or you certainly did while you were Archbishop of Canterbury, telling bishops that it was part of their role and part of their Christian faith, and this kind of thing, and where you've got the leverage to actually address these issues, like having the Church of England divest from oil companies, like stop flying all over the place on long-haul flights, and like stop owning so much surplus property, like different houses that you've got everywhere. You don't do anything about those things. You don't care one iota about the environment. And I've made several videos about your environmentalism and the fact that you're just promoting a political agenda, and that you're also trying to erode the basic doctrines of the Christian faith to subvert Christianity, the ultimate goal of the globalists being to bring in a one world religion of environmentalism and earth worship, which subjugates human beings to the environment, to the earth, and to other creatures, and with the view of just eliminating people, saying that they're an environmental hazard, and getting rid of all the inconvenient people, which is virtually everybody on the planet. So I've made these videos before to illustrate this, and so here you are saying climate change is left wing. Some people view it this way, which suggests to me that the laws of nature are left wing. Well, you're not concerned with the laws of nature because you don't do anything to address these things where you have control. All you do is promote this bullshit political agenda with the view of eliminating everybody and stealing all their property. So you then say it's one of those, it's so totally inadequately catered for in our usual left and right things, but if it's associated with one particular political identity, then we know that a disproportionately conservative press will treat it as if it were that kind of leftist issue. Well, the British press isn't disproportionately conservative. It's just that the left wing has gone so extreme left that anything around the centre appears extremely right wing. So the British press isn't disproportionately conservative. Anything that you don't want is disproportionately conservative. You did also talk about changing the culture in this lecture that you gave. I'm not commenting on that particular clip today, but you've over and over again talked about changing the culture, and your whole attitude and the way you operate is subversive, and you're pretending it's to this good end to save the poor and save the world and save the environment, and really you're just trying to have us all exterminated. So you then say, I'm baffled by that because 100 years ago or so, many of the voices which were beginning now already to say sensible things about sustainability and environment came from far more conservative quarters, and unfortunately some of the most aggressive, environmentally poisonous, you emphasise that, approaches in the last century were developed by so-called socialist states. So it's not a left-right issue, and you raise your voice an octave here to make yourself try and sound authoritative. And you're also, at this point in the lecture, where you're answering questions and talking about this, although you weren't doing this earlier, you've put on your aristocratic accent. I actually think this is one of your separate personas, your aristocratic accent persona, and this is your professor persona, where you're presenting the idea that you're intellectually superior to other people and that you've got a greater understanding of issues than other people, and you're communicating this great wisdom to lesser people, people of lesser intelligence. So this is your professor persona you're putting on here. And it's interesting, one of the reasons I mentioned the video that I'd uploaded the day before you gave this lecture that I'm commenting about now, when I said that you said capitalism was a potentially lethal monster, and I said communism is an actually lethal monster because nearly 100 million people were killed by communist dictators in the 20th century. So you're now talking about the communist states of the 20th century being so-called socialist states. So they weren't really socialist then, these murderous regimes. They were so-called socialist. And socialism is just this utopian paradigm that would be beneficial to everybody on the planet, even though it's always complete and utter scumbags like you who get all the power, corrupt individuals. The more power you give to a smaller number of people, the more the corrupt, despotic sadists gravitate towards that power. And that's what you get when you have totalitarian states. And it's impossible to implement communism or socialism without a totalitarian state, because you need to stamp out the free market. And in order to do that, you need to have terrible penalties for people practicing things on the black market. And so this is what they do. They're spying on everybody, they're persecuting everybody, they're building walls around the people to stop them escaping. And this is what happens in socialist states. Not so-called socialist states, but socialist states. And the more that the West has gravitated towards communism, as it has at the moment, they call this system capitalist, but in fact it's communist, as I've said before on many videos. There are some elements of capitalism left, but not many. And of course, all these multinational companies and everything can be bribing corrupt politicians to be passing laws to their advantage and this kind of thing. So the more the West has gravitated towards communism, the more we've got of this spying on people, on ordinary people, going about ordinary business, which is going on, and they're pretending that this is because of terrorism. Well, the terrorism is a hoax. It's so the same agencies that are spying on us, like MI5 and MI6, and the CIA and other spy agencies, they're all spying on us, but they're the ones who are perpetrating these terrorist acts to give them an excuse to spy on us. So this is what happens when you're giving government more control. The regime just becomes exceptionally oppressive for ordinary citizens. So it is a left and right issue, because you're not concerned about the environment, as I've just demonstrated. You're only concerned about controlling everybody, pushing them around and telling them what to do. And on the subject of the environment being more a right-wing issue in the past, which is what you were saying, that people who were not left-wing were concerned about the environment. Well, the environment in the West was in a lot worse state in the past, you know, with smogs in London, that people were dying breathing and all this kind of thing. And I'm actually just going to read a list of environmental laws in the United Kingdom. This isn't an exhaustive list, by the way, and it also doesn't include additional legislation in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So it's quite a long list, and it's not even an exhaustive list. So here you are. Alkali Act 1863, Clean Air Act 1956, also 1968 and 1993, Clean Neighbourhoods and Environment Act 2005, Climate Change Act 2008, Climate Change and Sustainable Energy Act 2006, Energy Act 2010, Forestry Act 1991, Ground Game Act 1880, Hunting Act 2004, Merchant Shipping Pollution Act 2006, Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006, Planning Act 2008, Pollution Prevention and Control Act, Waste Minimisation Act, Water Act 2003. The Waste Minimisation Act was 1998. Pollution Prevention and Control Act 1999. My hand was over the year there. Water Act 2003, Weeds Act 1959, Scrap Metal Dealers Act 2013, Controlled Waste Act Regulations 1992, Landfill Tax Regulations, Special Waste Regulations, Hazardous Waste Regulations, Waste Batteries and Accumulators Act, Waste Regulations, Control of Asbestos Regulations, Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Regulations. That's not even an exhaustive list. The reason that more people were concerned about the environment in the past was because the environment and pollution and so on, pollution of waterways and pollution of the air, were not so well controlled in the act, in the past rather. And since smokeless zones, for example, have been brought in, then we have clean air, and there's limits on the amount of pollution that cars are allowed to produce. So the reason that the environment is now only really environmental issues in the hands of the people who are not aware that this is a hoax, and in the interests of extreme left-wing people like you who want to bring in a totalitarian government to be pushing everyone around and controlling everybody and exterminating everybody. The reason it's extreme left-wing people who are promoting this all the time in a very aggressive way and disparaging their opponents is because the things that ordinary people were concerned about in the past, like clean air and water, these issues have been addressed in the West. And you're right that there was a terrible amount of pollution caused by communist states previously. Western governments in Western Europe were having to spend a fortune cleaning up rivers that were coming into Western Europe from Eastern Europe because of all this pollution. Well, the problem is, you see, if nobody owns the land and nobody owns property, then nobody's responsible for it. So they just throw rubbish on it, throw rubbish in the river. Nobody cares about it because nobody's responsible for these things. So it's not in anyone's interest to be spending their money and time cleaning them up. So that's another drawback of central planning, that nobody cares about things that don't belong to them on the whole. So this is what happens when the government's in control of everything. So you then say, for those who've not read it, it's a surprise to find T.S. Eliot, who nobody could call left-wing in his idea on the idea of Christian society, already saying in 1939, we cannot continue with the exploitative, extractive practices that we currently tolerate in respect of our natural environment. Extractive practices, mining all kinds of things out of the ground, like oil and coal and metals, that kind of thing. Well, what does exploitative, extractive practice mean exactly, anyway? And was T.S. Eliot an expert in this field? I mean, obviously the world's resources are limited, but it's pure propaganda that the majority of things are running out. Oil's not running out, for a start. And you were supposedly supporting coal miners in South Wales, weren't you? Appearing on coal miners' picket lines, waving placards. I've shown that before as well in a video. So why were you supporting the coal miners then if you're against the exploitative extractive practices? You're just promoting a political agenda and virtue signalling. You don't care one iota about anybody. You don't care about coal miners. You don't care about the environment. You don't care about anybody except promoting your own interests and promoting this political agenda of yours. So no, we can't keep on extracting things from the earth forever, but then it's pure propaganda that the majority of things that we extract from the earth are running out. It's simply not true. Oil is not running out. There's plenty of oil. This peak oil is a hoax that was made up by the Rockefellers to artificially inflate prices of oil and to set world oil prices. They're trying to be in control of everything. So this is what it's all about. So we can't go on extracting forever, but then on the other hand, things aren't running out and we can recycle things. So there's no need to be bringing in a totalitarian one world government in response to any of these issues. And this environmentalist fanaticism is an extreme left-wing issue. It's got nothing to do with the laws of nature. You've got no sense at all if you think that's the case. And you've got no sense at all if you think I'm going to believe any of your bullshit. Anyway, I've been talking for quite a long time now, so I'll leave this video here because I want to be getting on with other things later on since we're coming up to Christmas. Don't forget to be alert in case I turn up to arrest you for terrorism over the Christmas period. That would be quite a nice touch. And of course I'll be spending all my time dreaming about my beloved because he's so wonderful and we're made for each other and we're soon going to be on our bed of roses. Hasta la próxima.
What hope is there of preventing the popular press in this country from attacking these proposals? Thank you.
What hope is there of preventing the popular press in this country attacking these proposals? Don't hold your breath. I don't hold out very much hope in that respect because I think a disproportionate amount of the popular press is, let's say, disproportionately tolerant of a laissez-faire or head-in-the-sand approach to these matters. That's where it's very important to keep these ideas, these challenges alive through social media, through those other channels we have. But no, I'm not holding my breath for a positive response from that quarter, I have to say. It's an odd thing that what is statistically so much a minority report in terms of political, scientific, geopolitical perspective is given as such a free pass in a lot of the media, because there's this mysterious assumption that climate change is left-wing, which suggests to me that the laws of nature are left-wing.
How do you respond to climate change deniers?
With puzzlement, really. I can see that people will want to hold us to the fact that we're dealing in probabilities, not cast-iron certainties. That's fine, that's fair enough. But it seems to me that on almost any analysis, we as the human inhabitants of this planet have been responsible for altering the circumstances in which we live. I don't see how you can deny that. You can argue about the measure of it, you can argue about the proportion between human-generated and natural causes outside our control. But even if you were to allow a very large measure of scepticism there, you might still, I would still want to say, we have environmental degradation, which impacts horribly on the most vulnerable, and we ought to do something about it. So don't get too bogged down in the science. I say it with respect, but there clearly is an issue about which something can be done. And so to the denier, I'd say, well, if you insist on denying it, okay, but can you not recognize that there is an agenda? Wherever it comes from, there's an agenda here.
Because their real ambition has nothing whatever to do with the environment. I first learnt this when the late Eric Ellington, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace, who became quite a friend of mine and was a genuine environmentalist, nobody more non-political than he, told me that a couple of years after they had founded Greenpeace, they had all had to leave because they weren't politicians and they weren't political. They didn't know how to deal with the Marxists, who, he said, had taken over the organisation for purposes that clearly had nothing to do with the environment and were everything to do with destroying the economies of the West as fast as possible from within without a shot being fired. And I said to him, Eric, I said, look, you're about as political as a rabbit. And you're talking about Marxists having taken over your movement. Doesn't this all sound a bit kind of flaky and extreme? He said, look, that's what happened. The Berlin Wall came down, all these people piled out of it, piled into the Green Movement, and they've taken it over and they're running it. He said, I call them watermelons. They're green on the outside and red on the in. My own phrase for these people who are at this Rio conference is the traffic light tendency. The green's too yellow to admit they're really reds. And this conference, from their point of view, has been a resounding failure. And from my point of view, as somebody who loves the West and would like to see it survive without being destroyed from within, it was a triumphant success. They had hoped to get the nations of the world to make binding commitments effectively to allow the United Nations to become a sort of world government. Now, you may think, listening to this, that that's rather extreme, talking about global government. Well, Al Gore's been talking about it, Jacques Chirac of France has been talking about it, Jacques Attali of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has been talking about it. An awful lot of politicians have been talking about the desirability of, as they see it, global government. We know from the September the 15th, 2009 draft of what had been intended to be the Copenhagen Treaty, which fortunately failed when it was exposed to the public gaze, that they were indeed intending to put forward a 186-page blueprint for a global government with all its structures, all its revenue sources, the direct power of taxation given to the UN over the members of the UN, direct powers of environmental intervention, and the word government actually appears in this context twice in the draft of the treaty. You'll find it at Annex 1, sections 36 and 38. And they wanted to do the same here. They realized they could no longer bring forward the climate as an excuse, and you barely heard climate change mentioned here. Oh, it's still in the text. It's still there, but it's no longer the number one issue.
Where it was found, halt carbon addiction, reshape predictions, the chance to change has nearly gone. Renewable is the only one, the final sources of energy, solar, wind, tidal, electricity.
I don't understand how environmentalism and capitalism can get on.
Capitalism is at odds with environmentalism in a big way. The fact that any savings that businesses make, they're bound to economically pump them into expanding their enterprises and creating more profit is inherent within the system.
capitalism in general is just a perverse concept, and I think that climate change is one of the very clear examples of how this affects our very daily lives.
Capitalism is at odds with environmentalism, so capitalism must go. Bye-bye.
On InfoWars Nightly News, group that admitted manufacturing global warming threat still pushes same hoax. PrisonPlanet.com story. And basically, our old friends in the global warming alarmist movement are up to their old tricks once again. The secretive Club of Rome has issued a report entitled 2052, a global forecast for the next 40 years, which decries improving living standards in developing countries and warns that man-made climate change could eventually kill off humans entirely. So who is the Club of Rome? Well, it's similar to the Bilderberg Group. It's a collection of power brokers. They don't meet very often like Bilderberg do annually, but they put out reports like this one, warning us that if we don't pay carbon taxes to Al Gore and Marie Strong, both Club of Rome members, that, you know, the sky's going to fall in. Global warming is going to wipe out humanity. And why it's rich, and I mean, this, of course, this is what the mainstream media has failed to report and point out in each one of these articles about this new Club of Rome report. Basically, they're calling for a new system of governance, global governance, enforcing eco-fascism on the back of fears about rising temperatures. But this is the very same group, the same organization who in their 1990 report, The First Global Revolution, openly admitted that they had manufactured the idea, the quote idea, to use global warming as a means of creating this fake outside threat of eco-apocalypse. And this is the direct quote from the report, which you can read in the article. Quote, in searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy then is humanity itself. And this passage appears under a subheadline entitled, quote, the common enemy of humanity is man. So basically, that's them admitting that they manufactured this phony threat to make mankind the enemy. And now they're going to punish mankind by enforcing this draconian global government in the name of saving the planet. So again, you know, even as the science discredits the global warming alarmists, just as it discredited the Paul Ehrlichs and John P. Holdrens of the world when they were fear-mongering about a deadly new ice age back in the 70s, the modern-day climate change alarmists are being discredited once again by the very science. You know, polar bear populations exploding, emperor penguins exploding, ice sheets thickening, Bering Sea ice thickening, Himalayas ice thickening. The temperature is in fact getting colder, and they're once again fear-mongering about rising temperatures requiring the need for a new global government and a carbon tax, when they were the ones who admittedly said, we're going to create this fake scare and blame it on humanity to get this power. So, you know, just pay your carbon tax to Al Gore and Marie Strong and everything will be okay. They'll save the world.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We meet as people of faith in the context of this critical moment in human history. And so we are not here just to plead or harangue, let alone to encourage panic and terror. We are here to say two simple things to ourselves, our neighbours, and our governments. First, don't be afraid, but ask how the policies you follow and the lifestyle that you take for granted look in the light of the command to love the world you inhabit. Ask what would be a healthy and sustainable relationship with this world. How shall we build international institutions that make sure the resources get where they are needed? That, for example, green taxes will deliver more security for the disadvantaged. That transitions in economic patterns will not weigh most heavily on those least equipped to cope.
Which suggests to me that the laws of nature are left-wing. And it's one of those issues which is so totally inadequately catered for in our usual left and right things. But if it's once associated with one particular political identity, then we know that a disproportionately conservative press will treat it as if it were that kind of leftist issue. I'm baffled by that, because 100 years ago or so, many of the voices which were beginning already to say sensible things about sustainability and environment came from far more conservative quarters. And unfortunately, some of the most aggressive, environmentally poisonous approaches in the last century were developed by so-called socialist states. So it's not a left-right issue. For those who've not read it, it's a surprise to find T.S. Eliot, whom nobody could call left-wing, in his essay on the idea of a Christian society, already saying in 1939, we cannot continue with the exploitative, extractive practices that we currently tolerate in respect of our natural environment. All very odd.
Don't try to change me, you're wasting your time. Now I got something much better in mind. Robert De Niro's waiting, talking Italian.
Why Catholics have the best sex.
Adelante.
Oh, what care I for my house and my land? What care I for my money? Oh, I'd rather have a kiss from the wild gypsy's lips. I'm away with the Raggle, Taggle, Gypsy.
With the Raggle, Taggle, Gypsy.
I'm away with the Raggle, Taggle, Gypsy. Oh.